The damage was catastrophic. When they towed in what was supposedly Richard Petty's number 43 Plymouth, I almost laughed. It was beyond salvageable: bent frame, cracked engine block, a gutted shell that most experts would dismiss as scrap. Yet here stood Vanessa Hayes in my Fort Worth garage, asking me to resurrect this wreck. "You were the best crew chief NASCAR had seen in a decade," she said. "If anyone can save this car, it's you." Her knowledge of my history raised questions. Something about her confidence unsettled me, stirring memories of failures I'd tried to outrun. Why invest a fortune restoring this demolished replica? The truth would prove shocking. Every subscriber means the world to me, and your support keeps these incredible stories coming. If you love heartwarming journeys and unexpected twists, hit that subscribe button and like the video. Also, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and let's see how far this story has traveled. Mason Reed wiped his hands on a shop rag as the flatbed truck pulled into his garage lot. The Wednesday morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as he squinted at the approaching vehicle. He could make out the shape of something on the back, something that barely resembled a car anymore. Just a twisted heap of metal, dented and broken beyond what most would consider salvageable. The tow truck driver, a weathered man with forearms like tree trunks, hopped down from the cab and nodded at Mason. "Got a delivery for Reed Restoration," he said, already pulling out a clipboard with paperwork. "Came all the way from Atlanta. Owner paid extra for enclosed transport despite." He gestured at the wreckage with a grimace. Mason took the clipboard, scanning the details with increasing disbelief. According to the paperwork, this mangled mess was supposedly a Plymouth Road Runner, a replica of the legendary number 43 Richard Petty's iconic NASCAR vehicle. The King's car. Even as a replica, it would have been valuable to collectors and racing enthusiasts if it had been intact. Now it looked like it had been put through a crusher and then dropped from a cliff. "You're kidding me," Mason muttered, walking around the flatbed to assess the damage. He pulled out his phone and began taking photos, documenting what he saw with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades around race cars. The Petty blue paint was visible in only a few places, most panels warped or completely torn away. The famous number 43 was barely discernible on what remained of the driver's door. As Mason circled the wreckage, his expression grew grimmer. The frame bent in multiple places, roof partially caved in, cracked dashboard and steering column pushed toward the driver's seat. Most concerning was what appeared to be a crack running along the engine block, a death sentence for most restoration projects. 70% of the body panels will need complete replacement, he said aloud. Frame damage is extensive. Probably a cracked engine block. Interior gutted. He shook his head. This isn't a restoration. This is a resurrection. The smell of burning rubber and high-octane fuel seemed to drift from the wreckage as Mason's inspection triggered memories from his NASCAR days. He could almost hear the deafening roar of engines pushed to their limits, picturing Richard Petty's number 43 flying past competitors. Once a champion's chariot, now a ghost of Plymouth steel. The King's 200 wins. 7 Daytona 500 victories. This car represented an era when NASCAR drivers were legends. "Where do you want it?" the driver asked, breaking Mason's nostalgic trance. "Bay 3, Mason replied, pointing to an empty garage space. "Though I'm not sure why anyone would bother. Most folks would strip it for parts and scrap the rest." As the driver worked to lower the flatbed, Mason sensed someone watching him. He turned to see a woman standing near the office entrance. She wore dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and despite standing in shadow, sunglasses shielded her eyes. Her posture, confident, patient, almost expectant, suggested she was connected to this delivery. The woman approached as Mason signed the paperwork. "Mr. Reed?" she asked, removing her sunglasses. "I'm Vanessa Hayes. That's my car." Mason sized her up. "Ms. Hayes, I don't normally like to discourage business, but what you're looking at here is beyond reasonable repair. The cost to restore would exceed the value by a considerable margin." Vanessa nodded, her eyes fixed on the wreckage. "I'm aware of the condition. I've had 3 other shops tell me the same thing." She looked directly at Mason now. But they weren't. Mason Reed, former chief of the fastest pit crew NASCAR had seen in a decade. Mason felt a chill run down his spine. His NASCAR days weren't something he advertised. The car means something to me, she continued. I understand the cost and challenges. Money isn't the issue. Finding someone with the skill and heart to do it right is. Mason walked back to the car. We'd have to fabricate almost everything from scratch. Can you do it? She asked simply. Mason studied her face, searching for hesitation. There was none. Just determination and something else. A personal connection to this car that went beyond what she was telling him. I'd need to do a complete assessment, Mason said, dialing his phone. Hey Tyler, can you come by the shop? There's something here you need to see. He ended the call. My son's studying engineering at TCU. He helps out when he can. Mason narrowed his eyes. How did you know about my NASCAR background? Vanessa smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I do my research, Mr. Reed. Especially when it comes to things that matter to me. Mason nodded slowly. The challenge called to him, the chance to bring something back from the dead. I'll do the assessment, he said finally. But I can't promise I'll take the job until I know exactly what we're dealing with. Vanessa extended her hand. That's all I'm asking for now, Mr. Reed. Mason's office felt smaller with Vanessa Hayes in it. 3 days after the car arrived, she sat across from his cluttered desk for their formal consultation, her posture perfect against the worn leather chair. The contrast between her and his usual clientele couldn't have been more striking. Most of his customers wore work boots and faded jeans, not designer clothes, and a watch that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Mason cleared his throat and slid a folder across the desk. I've put together a preliminary assessment, he said, watching her expression carefully. The restoration will take at least 8 months, possibly longer. The parts alone will run over $70,000, and labor will push the total north of $200,000. He waited for the inevitable shock, the polite retreat most clients made when faced with such figures. Instead, Vanessa opened the folder and studied the itemized list with the focus of someone who actually understood what she was reading. I see you're planning to rebuild the 426 Hemi rather than replace it, she said, examining a specific line item. Even with the crack in the block? Mason blinked. Yes. The crack is on the water jacket. With proper welding and reinforcement, it can be salvaged. Authentic Hemi engines from that era are nearly impossible to find. Good choice, she nodded. When Richard drove the Plymouth at Daytona in '73, his engine had similar issues after qualifying. The team worked through the night reinforcing a crack almost exactly like this one. Mason leaned forward. Most clients knew basics, maybe the model year or a famous driver, but not specific races or technical challenges from nearly 50 years ago. You know your NASCAR history, he said cautiously. Vanessa smiled. My father never missed a race. She flipped to the next page. I see you're planning to hand-form the quarter panels. The originals are too damaged and reproductions for that specific body style don't exist. Like your team did for Bobby Carter at Talladega in 2009, she said, a hint of challenge in her eyes. After the wreck in Turn 3, you fabricated a replacement panel during the rain delay. Carter finished 7th despite starting the day in the wall. The memory hit Mason like a physical force. That rain-soaked afternoon remained one of his proudest moments as a crew chief. A story known to racing insiders but hardly common knowledge. How exactly did you hear about that? He asked, unable to mask his suspicion. Before she could answer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, and stepped toward the window with an apologetic smile. Mason could still hear fragments. Tell Dad the Hendrick deal isn't finalized yet. No, we can't announce the sponsorship until the legal team reviews. The ownership structure remains the same through Texas. Mason pretended to organize papers, his mind racing. Team ownership? Sponsorship negotiations? Her casual references to high-level NASCAR business dealings didn't align with being simply a passionate fan. When she returned, Mason probed further. You mentioned you acquired the car from a collector in Atlanta. Which one? A private seller, she replied smoothly. Not a major collector, just someone who had kept it in storage for years. Strange that they'd have authentic Petty team markings under the dash, Mason said, watching her reaction. The kind that aren't visible unless you know where to look. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before her composed expression returned. The previous owner was thorough with the details. Apparently, Mason said. I noticed you've suggested Willwood disc brakes for the restoration. They're excellent but not period correct. Safety modifications seem reasonable. I'd think you'd appreciate that considering your emphasis on safety after the Jones crash at Bristol. Mason felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Another piece of his history that wasn't common knowledge. About parts, she continued. I'd prefer Simmons Performance for engine components. And Taylor Custom for interior work. Those suppliers typically work with current NASCAR teams, he said carefully. They don't generally take on restoration projects. Vanessa smiled. They'll take this one. I've already spoken with them. The pieces weren't fitting. Her knowledge of racing history, her connections to exclusive suppliers, her conversation about team ownership, all pointed to someone deeply embedded in the racing world. I'll need a $50,000 deposit to begin, Mason said finally. Vanessa reached into her bag and placed a cashier's check on the desk for $100,000. Who are you really? Mason asked. Just someone who believes this car deserves a second chance, she said, rising. And someone who believes the same about you, Mason Reed. Despite his misgivings, Mason found himself nodding. We start tomorrow, he said, picking up the check. I still think you're crazy to spend this much on a replica. Vanessa smiled genuinely. Some things are worth more than their market value, Mr. Reed. I think you understand that better than most. The sound of metal against metal filled the garage as Mason dragged a cutting wheel across what remained of the Plymouth's rear quarter panel. The harsh whine echoed off the walls, drowning out the country music playing from an old radio in the corner. Tyler stood nearby, clipboard in hand, ready to document each piece as it came off. They had begun the painful process of dismantling what was once a glorious number 43, now reduced to a patient on an operating table. Part number 47B, Mason called out, holding up a twisted piece of blue metal. Quarter panel section, passenger side, rear. Condition, unsalvageable. Tyler marked it down in their inventory system, a combination of digital spreadsheets and physical tags attached to each component. Mason had insisted on this meticulous documentation, knowing that even the smallest part might contain valuable restoration clues. As the dismantling continued, they uncovered a litany of problems. Hidden rust eating away critical supports, hairline cracks in the frame, evidence of hasty repairs beneath layers of Bondo and paint. The vehicle's history was written in its deteriorating bones. Dad, this is way beyond what we estimated, Tyler said, removing a corroded section of floorboard. The entire driver's side frame rail needs replacement. Mason wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of grime. Good thing you're taking that advanced materials course. We're going to need all your engineering know-how on this one. That evening, Tyler stayed late, using a digital scanner to create 3D models of parts they would need to fabricate. The next morning he presented his work to Mason. I've modeled the frame section with reinforcement points here and here, Tyler said, pointing to his laptop screen. It's stronger than original but maintains the same dimensions and weight. Mason studied the rendering. This is exactly what we used to do for superspeedway cars, adding structural support without affecting performance. He paused, realizing he'd never shared these details before. We had this driver, Jimmy Daniels, who kept scraping the wall at Talladega. We reinforced that section, saved about 4 pounds, and he gained nearly 0.2 per lap. Tyler looked up. You never told me about that. Never had a reason to, Mason replied simply, something in his expression softening. As days passed, Mason shared more stories from his NASCAR days. Techniques for shaving seconds off tire changes, the pressure of split-second decisions. Each removed component seemed to pry loose another memory he'd kept locked away since leaving the sport. During the third week, while removing the dashboard remnants, Mason discovered something unexpected. A small sticker hidden beneath layers of grime. Tyler, look at this. Mason cleaned the area with a soft cloth. This is a NASCAR Tech Inspection sticker from 1973. Authentic. Tyler leaned in. I thought this was just a replica? That evening, Tyler stayed late, using a digital scanner to create 3D models of parts they would need to fabricate. The next morning he presented his work to Mason. I've modeled the frame section with reinforcement points here and here, Tyler said, pointing to his laptop screen. It's stronger than original but maintains the same dimensions and weight. Mason studied the rendering. This is exactly what we used to do for superspeedway cars, adding structural support without affecting performance. He paused, realizing he'd never shared these details before. We had this driver, Jimmy Daniels, who kept scraping the wall at Talladega. We reinforced that section, saved about 4 pounds, and he gained nearly 2/10 per lap. Tyler looked up. You never told me about that. Never had a reason to, Mason replied simply, something in his expression softening. As days passed, Mason shared more stories from his NASCAR days. Techniques for shaving seconds off tire changes, the pressure of split-second decisions. Each removed component seemed to pry loose another memory he'd kept locked away since leaving the sport. During the third week, while removing the dashboard remnants, Mason discovered something unexpected. A small sticker hidden beneath layers of grime. Tyler, look at this. Mason cleaned the area with a soft cloth. This is a NASCAR Tech Inspection sticker from 1973. Authentic. Tyler leaned in. I thought this was just a replica? It was supposed to be. Mason examined it closer, finding more evidence. A faded part number stamped into the firewall, consistent with Petty Enterprises' numbering system. Maybe there's more to this car than Ms. Hayes let on. Speaking of Vanessa, she visited every few days to check progress. During one visit, she noticed Tyler struggling with a bracket design. The original had a weak point at the frame connection, she observed. Petty's team modified them with a double weir junction after Darlington in '72. Reduced vibration by nearly 40%. Mason looked up. Such specific technical knowledge wasn't something casual fans possessed. One evening after Vanessa had left, Mason sat with Tyler on shop stools, surrounded by the disassembled car. You know why I left NASCAR? Mason asked suddenly. Tyler shook his head. The subject had always been off limits. Final race at Charlotte. Championship on the line. Mason's voice grew quiet. I made a call on the last pit stop. 4 tires instead of 2. Lost track position. Our driver hit the wall trying to make up the difference. He rubbed his hands together. Nobody was hurt, but we lost the championship. Team owner fired me the next day. Tyler said nothing, just placed his hand on his father's shoulder. Sometimes I think I've been hiding in this garage ever since, Mason admitted. Taking on simple restorations, nothing risky. They sat in silence, surrounded by disassembled pieces of the Plymouth, now just parts spread across the concrete floor. Like Mason's career, the car had been broken down to its elements, waiting for a second chance. Look at it, Mason said finally, gesturing around them. Doesn't look like much now, does it? Tyler surveyed the scene. Hundreds of tagged parts, the bare frame on jack stands, the engine block in the corner. No. But it will be. Mason nodded, seeing beyond the scattered parts to the possibilities they represented. Yes, he said quietly. It will. The lamp above Mason's workbench cast a yellow pool of light across the metal panel he was shaping. The garage around him had gone quiet hours ago, but he remained hunched over his work with a body hammer in one hand and a dolly in the other. Each tap was deliberate, reshaping the metal millimeter by millimeter. The contours of the number 43 Plymouth's quarter panel were distinctive, not something you could just order from a catalog. Even if reproduction panels had been available, they wouldn't have matched the subtle curves of the original. He paused, holding the panel up to the template he'd created from old photographs and technical drawings. Still not quite right. The metal needed to flow like water frozen in time, capturing the exact aerodynamic profile that had helped push the original car to victory after victory. Mason adjusted his grip and returned to his work, the rhythmic ping of metal striking metal filling the otherwise silent garage. The rebuilding phase had begun 2 weeks earlier. Every salvageable part catalogued, every unusable component marked for fabrication. Mason reached into his mental archives, applying techniques from his NASCAR days, tricks absent from repair manuals. He mixed modern welding methods with old-school panel beating. The metal yielded beneath his hands like clay, transforming into components faithful to history yet structurally superior. "That doesn't look like it's in any of the books," Tyler had commented one morning, watching his father use a torch to heat shrink a section of metal. "Because it isn't," Mason replied. "Learned this from an old-timer at Petty Enterprises who'd been shaping metal since the 60s. He could make steel flow like it was clay." The challenges mounted daily. Vintage parts proved elusive: brake systems, carburetors, trim pieces, each representing another hurdle. Mason thought of the '08 Charlotte race as he worked, how every component had mattered then. How every component mattered now. Mason made calls to contacts long dormant. Former colleagues from NASCAR. Specialists in vintage racing. Even old competitors. "Frank, it's Mason Reed. Yeah, it's been a while. Listen, I'm looking for an original Holly 4-barrel for a '71 Plymouth." Tyler brought engineering precision to complement Mason's tactile knowledge. When they couldn't find an original wiring harness, Tyler designed one with period-correct appearance and improved safety. His 3D models allowed them to test components before cutting into limited materials. "See, if we route the wiring this way," Tyler explained, showing Mason a diagram, "we maintain the original layout but eliminate the fire risk." Mason nodded. "Smart. Very smart." This was restoration. This was redemption. Vanessa arrived one Monday with a cardboard box that made Mason's eyes widen. "Is that?" he began, unable to finish the sentence. "An original Plymouth instrument cluster?" "Yes." She placed the box down and handed him a thick folder. "Technical drawings from Petty Enterprises, 1971 through 1973. Including specifications for the superspeedway modifications." Mason flipped through the papers, stunned. "These are internal team documents. They weren't published. How did you get these?" Vanessa smiled. "I told you I have connections." More deliveries followed. Racing tires. Authentic paint formula. A NASCAR spec roll cage matching Petty's team specifications. The garage walls filled with period memorabilia, transforming into something between workshop and museum. One challenging day found them struggling with the engine rebuild. The cracked block had been repaired, but balancing the rotating assembly required precision beyond their equipment. "We need a dynamic balancer," Mason sighed. "One accurate to within half a gram." Tyler looked up from the components. "That's specialized equipment. Even the engineering lab at school doesn't have one that precise." Mason nodded, then shared a buried memory. "Charlotte Motor Speedway 2008. Driver championship on the line. We were down to our backup engine after a valve failure in practice." His eyes grew distant. "I stayed up 36 hours straight rebuilding that engine by hand. Balanced every component myself. When race day came, our car had 3 more horsepower than any other team." A smile. "We won by 0.2 of a second." The smile faded. 3 races later I made the call that ended my career." Tyler placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Words unnecessary. The next day a precision balancer arrived. Vanessa offered no explanation beyond, "I thought you might need this." As the Plymouth took shape, Mason noticed how Vanessa's eyes lit up during certain conversations, particularly when discussing races involving Hayes' racing team. He recognized the name but missed the connection that seemed obvious in retrospect. The most striking transformation wasn't in the car but in Mason himself. The walls around his past crumbled. He shared untold stories with Tyler, reconnected with old colleagues, and found himself anticipating Vanessa's visits with something beyond professional interest. Just as the Plymouth emerged from broken parts into former glory, Mason felt his spirit undergoing similar restoration, piece by piece, through the work of hands that remembered what it meant to build something that mattered. Dawn painted the sky in pale orange and pink as Mason and Tyler carefully pushed the restored Plymouth from the trailer onto the empty county road. 6 months of painstaking work had transformed the mangled wreck into something beautiful. The car sat low and powerful on the asphalt, its petty blue paint catching the early morning light with a depth that seemed to pull from the sky itself. The white number 43 stood proud against the blue, crisp and perfect, just as it had looked racing around ovals decades ago. "She looks right at home here," Tyler said, running his hand along the hood's perfect curve. He had spent countless hours helping sand and prepare the body for paint, and the results justified every minute. Mason circled the car slowly, checking everything one final time. The restoration was mechanically complete, but today would be the true test. The moment when they would discover if they had truly brought this legend back to life or merely created a beautiful shell. His eyes traced the Plymouth's lines, noting how the sunlight played across the surfaces he had shaped by hand. Every detail, from the period-correct decals to the specific texture of the upholstery, had been meticulously recreated. "Everything's ready," Tyler said, holding up his tablet. "I've got the diagnostic program running. We'll be monitoring temperatures, pressures, and timing in real time." Mason nodded but didn't move toward the driver's door. Doubt crept in. What if the engine refused to start? What if the repaired block collapsed under pressure? His professional reputation hung in the balance. "Only one way to find out," Tyler said quietly, reading his father's hesitation. Mason took a deep breath and opened the door. The interior smelled of new leather and fresh paint, with that distinctive race car blend of oil and fuel. He slid into the driver's seat, hands finding their places on the steering wheel. His fingers wrapped around the key, still hesitating. "This is it," he said. Moment of truth. Mason turned the key. The starter motor engaged with a healthy whine. 1 second passed. 2. 3. His heart sank. Then the 426 Hemi caught with a thunderous roar. The sound rolled across the empty landscape, echoing off distant trees. The engine settled into a powerful idle, each cylinder firing in perfect sequence, the exhaust note deep and aggressive, the unmistakable voice of NASCAR royalty. Mason felt moisture in his eyes. The vibration through the steering wheel connected him to decades of racing history and to his own past in a visceral way. Tyler's face appeared at the window, his expression a mixture of relief and triumph. "Oil pressure perfect," he shouted. "Temperature climbing normally. She's running, Dad." Mason nodded, revving the engine slightly. Everything responded perfectly. The accelerator pedal's sensitivity, the smoothness of the power delivery, the harmonic tones in the exhaust. A car pulled up behind their trailer. Vanessa stepped out, dressed casually in jeans and a jacket, her hair in a simple ponytail. As she approached, Mason noticed a vulnerability in her expression he hadn't seen before, something deeper than appreciation for craftsmanship. When she heard the engine, she stopped, one hand rising to her mouth. For a moment she looked transformed, not the confident client, but someone witnessing the return of something deeply personal. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice barely audible. Her fingers trailed lightly over the fender. "You've done the impossible, Mason." After completing system checks, Mason eased the Plymouth onto the road. With each mile, the car awakened further, like a phoenix rising from twisted metal, finding its wings with each shift of the transmission. The engine pulled strongly, the handling responded crisply. What had been broken now moved with purpose, devouring asphalt with hungry tires. During a testing break, Vanessa stepped away to take a call. Mason caught fragments that raised more questions than answers. "Yes, everything's on schedule. The car will be perfect for Dad's final race. We'll make the announcement at Texas Motor Speedway as planned." The cryptic phrases lingered in his mind. Final race. Announcement. A pattern was forming that he should have recognized sooner. That evening they celebrated at a small steakhouse. They toasted with bourbon, the satisfaction creating a warm bond between them. For Mason it felt strangely like family. His son across from him, Vanessa beside him, united by their shared passion for this car. As they loaded the Plymouth back onto the trailer under starlight, Vanessa suggested they debut the car at an upcoming nostalgic NASCAR event. Classic cars, racing legends, devoted fans who'll appreciate what you've accomplished. Mason agreed, watching her animated expressions. Something had shifted in him during this restoration. His feelings for Vanessa had grown beyond professional appreciation. but her secrets cast a shadow of uncertainty. Who was she really? And what would happen when those secrets finally came to light? The restored number 43 Plymouth gleamed under the special exhibition lighting at Texas Motor Speedway, its petty blue paint reflecting the spotlights with a depth that made it appear almost liquid. Mason stood beside it, his weathered hands resting lightly on the fender as he answered questions from the growing crowd of admirers. The nostalgic NASCAR event had drawn thousands of enthusiasts, many wearing vintage racing gear and carrying memorabilia from decades past. They circled the Plymouth with reverent expressions, pointing out details and snapping photos. "The cracked engine block was our biggest challenge," Mason explained to a gray-haired man wearing a Richard Petty hat from the 1970s. "We had to reinforce it without compromising the original specifications. Took 3 attempts to get it right." As he spoke, Mason's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for Vanessa. She had disappeared shortly after they arrived, excusing herself with a vague mention of arrangements to finalize. That had been 2 hours ago. While enthusiasts admired the masterfully restored vehicle, the person most responsible for its rebirth remained absent. A young fan approached, admiring the immaculate paint without touching it. "This is museum quality," he said. "How did you match the exact shade of petty blue?" Mason began explaining the custom paint formulation when the Speedway's public address system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join us at the main stage for a special ceremony honoring William Hayes, founder and owner of Hayes Racing, who has announced his retirement after 30 years in NASCAR." Mason froze. William Hayes. The name registered immediately. Hayes Racing was one of the most successful teams in modern NASCAR history. But why would this announcement cause Vanessa to disappear? Drawn by curiosity, Mason made his way toward the main stage. A decorated viewing platform displayed the distinctive Hayes Racing colors and logo. Several people stood there, including a distinguished silver-haired man Mason recognized from racing broadcasts, William Hayes himself. And beside him stood Vanessa. She wore a tailored blue blazer with the Hayes Racing emblem, looking every bit the executive rather than the passionate enthusiast who had spent months in his garage. The family resemblance was unmistakable. The same confident posture, the same determined jaw. And now, please welcome William Hayes and his daughter, Vanessa Hayes, who will be assuming leadership of Hayes Racing beginning next season. The crowd applauded as father and daughter moved to the podium. Mason stood motionless, the truth hitting him physically. Vanessa Hayes was racing royalty, the daughter of a billionaire team owner and his chosen successor. Her extensive knowledge, access to rare parts, mysterious phone calls about team ownership and unlimited restoration budget. All the pieces suddenly fit. William Hayes spoke briefly about his career before turning to his daughter. "NASCAR has always been a family tradition, and I'm proud to announce that Hayes Racing will continue under the leadership of someone who shares not only my name but my vision and passion for this sport. Ladies and gentlemen, the future of Hayes Racing, my daughter, Vanessa Hayes." As Vanessa began speaking, her eyes locked with Mason's. He saw recognition flash across her face, followed by what appeared to be regret. Mason retreated to a quiet corner, processing this revelation. Like the Plymouth he'd painstakingly restored piece by piece, his understanding of Vanessa was being reassembled into something entirely different. He felt both betrayed and strangely sympathetic, knowing well how past identities could both haunt and define you. He was contemplating a quiet exit when Vanessa appeared beside him. "I should have told you," she said simply. Mason nodded, unable to find words. "I was going to tell you after the car was finished," she continued. "But then it became more complicated. You and Tyler, the garage, the restoration, it all started to mean more than I expected." "Why the secrecy?" Mason finally asked. She leaned against the wall, suddenly looking tired despite her polished appearance. "Because that's all anyone sees. My father's daughter. The Hayes heiress. Never someone who loves racing and respects its history." Her voice softened. "With you, I was valued for my knowledge and passion, not my family name. The Plymouth," she continued, "is the flagship for a new division of Hayes Racing, one that honors NASCAR's heritage while we push the competitive team into the future. I'm taking over, and I want to launch a classic restoration division that preserves significant cars from racing history." Mason studied her face, seeing both the woman he had come to care for and this new version of her. "I want you to run it," she said. "Head of restoration for Hayes Racing. A full facility, any equipment you need, a team under your direction." The offer hung between them, a chance to return to the racing world on different terms. Some things deserve a second chance, Mason. Cars. Racing legacies. She paused. People too. 2 weeks after Texas Motor Speedway, Mason stood in the new Hayes Racing Restoration Division. His workbench, transplanted from his small garage, looked oddly at home among the state-of-the-art equipment. The restored Plymouth sat at the center, a phoenix risen from twisted metal. It symbolized Mason's redemption through craftsmanship and Vanessa's recognition for her genuine passion rather than her family name. "Ready for the next one?" Vanessa asked, holding blueprints for another historic race car. Mason nodded, their fingers brushing against the Plymouth's perfect paint. In that touch he felt possibilities neither could have imagined when that broken shell first arrived.